What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving a deep breakdown, analysis, reaction, and review of Universal's latest sci-fi action film, Jurassic World Rebirth. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to seeing this movie yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Jurassic World Rebirth is an American science fiction action thriller film directed by Gareth Edwards and written by David Keep, a standalone sequel to Jurassic World Dominion from 2022. It is the fourth Jurassic World film and the seventh installment overall in the Jurassic Park film franchise. The film stars Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, Jonathan Bailey, Rupert Friend, Manuel Garcia-Rulfo, and Ed Skrein. Work on the film began shortly after the release of Jurassic World Dominion, when executive producer Steven Spielberg recruited Keep to help him develop a new installment of the series. Now, Keep previously co-wrote the original Jurassic Park film from 1993, that is, and wrote its sequel, The Lost World Jurassic Park, which came out in 1997. Development of Rebirth was first reported in January of 2024. Edwards was hired as director a month later, and casting commenced shortly thereafter. Principal photography took place in Thailand, Malta, and the United Kingdom from June to September of 2024. Jurassic World Rebirth premiered on June 17th of this year at the Odeon Lux Leicester Square in London, and was released in the United States and Canada by Universal Pictures on July 2nd. And the film has received mixed reviews from critics, with some deeming it an improvement over previous entries and praising the action sequences and the dinosaurs, while others criticize the screenplay and characters. And to this point, it has grossed about $30.5 million worldwide against a budget of $180 million. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 336 critic reviews, and its popcorn meter currently sits at 71% with over 10,000 verified ratings. The film has a Metascore of 50 on Metacritic based on 54 critic reviews, and it has a user score of 5.5 based on 268 user ratings. And finally, the movie has a 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb with almost 50,000 ratings. Now, when I first heard this movie was being made, I distinctly remember, that is, rolling my eyes and letting out a long sigh. Because, look, I knew it was just another cash grab, right? I knew that absolutely no care was going to be taken in crafting a unique but believable sci-fi adventure. I knew this movie, like all the other remakes and reboots Hollywood has been giving us lately, would have only one goal in mind, and that's money. And don't get me wrong, I understand that that's the ultimate goal of every movie, right? To make as much money as possible. But I know that you can take the money owed to you as a screenwriter, for example, and then resign yourself to doing what it takes to write something truly great. That's not what we got here, just so we're clear. And, in this video, I'm going to go over in great depth exactly why I think that is. Now, the opening image of this film starts off in a lab on the remote island of Ile Saint Hubert. I know I'm not saying that, the way it's supposed to be said, but, whatevs. That's not the point. And we get scientists working on what we are told are mutant dinosaurs. I kid you not. But the scientists are walking in and out of containment unit. One of them with a Snickers bar in his mouth. No hands. Again, I kid you not. As one does when working with dangerous creatures, right? Anyway, he drops the wrapper and it gets sucked into the containment lock, jamming it, preventing it from closing completely. Now, at that point, the unit malfunctions and an alarm sounds for everyone to evacuate the lab. And Snickers Buddy is, of course, the last scientist out of the containment unit, and doesn't make it out before the doors close. And his partner has to stand there watching through the glass as he is eaten by the grotesque Distortus Rex. And look, this beginning was fine, I suppose. I have no real problem with how this movie started, but the way the dinosaurs got loose was just ridiculous here. A Snickers wrapper, like really? First off, a scientist working in a lab around the most dangerous creatures on Earth is walking around that lab in a hazmat suit, eating a Snickers with no hands. Because, I mean, you're not you when you're hungry, right? He couldn't have waited for his lunch break to eat so that nobody died, right? I just think the writers could have done better here. So that was strike one for me. Anyway, the setup begins with superimposed text, letting us know that the change in the Earth's climate is slowly killing the dinosaurs that were roaming free since the end of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, that there aren't that many left. And that's pretty important to some of what happens later in the film, so that's why I mentioned it here. Now, anyway, from there, we meet Martin Krebs, a shady corporate guy, in New York, driving through town, stuck in traffic because apparently there's a brontosaurus stuck near the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And while he's sitting there, Zora Bennett, played by Scarlett Jo, who is ex-military, jumps into the backseat of his car because she gets wind that he wants a meeting with her. And, they discuss a job wherein she would escort him and a civilian scientist to a restricted part of the world where dinosaurs are still thriving to retrieve 3 samples. One from a mosasaur, basically a prehistoric whale, a titanosaurus, which basically looks like a brontosaurus but with a bigger and much longer, like whip-like tail, and a Quetzalcoatlus. Not technically a dinosaur, but rather a pterosaur. But the point is, it was an animal that was definitely in the running for the largest flying animal to have ever lived. So, close enough, I suppose, right? Now, after Bennett initially refuses Krebs' proposal because it sounds too dangerous and she doesn't trust corporations or their interests, he offers her basically money so tall, and she immediately changes her mind, right? And then in order to get us out of the scene, he explains to her that they're bringing a civilian. Now, I don't have too much to say about this scene. It was basically a one-scene data dump serving as both the setup in that it sets up the rest of the film by laying out the mission that lies ahead, and the catalyst, as in it's the film's inciting incident, right? The thing that changes everything for Zora Bennett, right? The film's main, or at least the POV character, all in one. I thought it was really short in that it takes us to the debate about 5 minutes or so ahead of schedule, but it does manage to get the job done from a narrative standpoint, and that's really all that matters as a writer, because you want to avoid adding unnecessary scenes just to pad a section, especially at the beginning of a film, even though by rule you typically want to follow the main character at work, at home, and at play. And we don't really get that here. That said, as a writer, you can always pad the next beat or two of your film if it makes narrative sense to do so, as long as, you get to the break into two within what I like to call the acceptable window, that being, in my opinion, up to 3 minutes early, no later than 3 minutes late. Anything more than that, you start messing with your audience internal clock. And in this case, according to the film's runtime, the goal would have been around 16 minutes or so in. I will say that what might have been nice here, if you want to ask me what I would have maybe done in this situation, is I would have had her think about the offer, and then we would have watched Zora Bennett go home and then maybe go do something like workout or something like that. And we would have kind of seen what her life was like and maybe why the job would have been important for her to do in the first place. And this is where I think the writers missed an opportunity to, number one, pad out this particular beat, but number two, give us a reason to give a shit about Zora Bennett in the first place. So from there, we get to the debate wherein Krebs and Bennett go to a museum and visit with the civilian Dr. Henry Loomis, right? Now, as the requisite dino expert, he briefs them on what they can expect on their excursion before explaining that people don't really care about dinosaurs anymore. And they've done this a couple of times in the Jurassic Park series now. which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because we've had zoos for like a long time and people still go to zoos. So I don't understand why people would be tired of dinosaurs after maybe like a decade or two, why people would be tired of seeing dinosaurs in the wild. It just doesn't make any sense, especially since Alan Grant made a big deal about how people don't care about dinosaur bones anymore because they can literally go to the zoo and see a T-Rex. They can literally go to the zoo and see these animals in the flesh. And on social media and stuff like that. So why all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, people don't care about dinosaurs. I just find that hard to believe, but okay. Now, Krebs explains to Loomis that he's going to come with them, which is, of course, surprises him. And he initially protests, but then Bennett, who's a beautiful woman, I mean, if you know Scarlett Jo, you know, right? Guarantees his safety. And Krebs sells him on the idea of seeing actual dinosaurs no one's ever seen before out in the wild, in the flesh. And wouldn't you know, just like that, he agrees. And again, for somebody who studies dinosaurs, right, you would have thought that he would have at least seen dinosaurs in the flesh before, that wouldn't be how they would get him to do it. I mean, it feels to me like maybe, some kind of funding for further research or funding because, they're taking down the museum exhibit. So maybe you're like, hey, here's some money so that you can keep your exhibit going and keep your work going would have been the way to get this done. But seeing dinosaurs in the flesh, for somebody who studies dinosaurs, I would have thought that would have been like, been there, did it, you know what I mean, already, but okay. So they fly to Paramaribo, I know I didn't say that right, excuse me, to meet with Bennett's friend, Kincaid, who owns a boat, right? And the rest of his team. And he and Bennett, with the help of Atwater, another of Kincaid's crew, basically run a scam on Krebs, wherein they managed to get him to double the $10 million offer that he made to Bennett. And once he does, Kincaid agrees, and they're off. This is our break into two, again, about 5 minutes or so ahead of schedule. Bad screenwriters, smack on the hand, right? Now, this was your typical debate wherein the characters literally debate whether or not they're going to take on the thing that they've been presented with. I call it blank or nah, right? In this case, go on a dino hunt or nah, right? The writers do manage to stretch this section just a little bit, and it made some narrative sense here as they had to assemble a team, so to speak. But it also was a bit of nonsense in that they're trying to sell us that a dinosaur expert in a world where dinosaurs not only exist in the flesh, but that can be seen both in captivity and in the wild, that Dr. Loomis, again, like I was saying, has never actually been close enough to touch one. So in this case, in this section, I would say the writers did what I consider to be the bare minimum. And in addition, we end up at the break into two about 5 minutes too early for my taste. Deduction. Now, so here we are in Act 2. The B story, / fun and games, right? It's kind of an alternating type situation, right? And we see Kincaid's boat out on the open water as the crew searches for their first target, aka the mosasaur. Now, we get another data dump where Dr. Loomis explains why the dinosaurs can't survive anywhere except near the equator. And again, it's due to climate change. And look, I'm not a dinosaur expert, but I'm pretty sure I remember being taught that there were dinosaurs that were able to live in like colder climates and stuff like that as well. So this idea that dinosaurs, can't survive in modern society because of climate change, it doesn't really wash with me. But, take this with a grain of salt because these screenwriters don't do any real research when they write movies like this in the first place. So whatevs, right? And in this scene, we find out that Atwater is more than okay with actually killing the mosasaur as they procured a sample. But of course, Dr. Loomis, the dinosaur lover, is not. And this makes sense given what we know about the character at this point. Now, we get some character development wherein we find out that Kincaid is separated from his wife, that they lost a child, which will be important in understanding his actions throughout the remainder of the film. And Bennett kind of matches his energy by explaining that she lost someone important to her on a mission in Yemen, and that she missed her mom's funeral, which even Kincaid thinks is super fucked up, right? And look, and this is what I mean by character development for Bennett's character, right? Because in the debate, area of the script, we could have maybe had, Bennett's character trying to sleep and waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, thinking about the person that she lost on her mission in Yemen, or, kind of being sad about the fact that they missed their mother's funeral. These would have been things that instead of just telling us, walk us through it and let us kind of see how these things are literally impacting her life. And this gives us a chance to kind of get to the point and the place where we care about Bennett's character. And again, I just think the writers missed several opportunities where they could have really done some better character development with this particular character, especially since it seems like the Bennett character, number one on the call sheet, probably is the POV character. So next we meet Ruben Delgado and his daughters Isabella and Teresa on a sailboat, sailing on a boat out in deep water, right? And Teresa's boyfriend Xavier is also in tow, acting like a complete douchebag, right? Lazy AF, right? Which was the case so they could spend the film redeeming him, in my opinion, right? But as they're sailing on said boat, they actually encounter the infamous mosasaur, right? And you get the feeling that there's only one mosasaur out in these waters, and this is him, right? Or her, or it, or whatever you want to say, right? And the mosasaur ends up tipping over the boat, almost killing the family, trapping Xavier below deck. But despite the ordeal, they all managed to make it onto the capsized boat safely, including my man Xavier, who made it by the skin of his teeth, right? Now, this was kind of a ridiculous mini beat to me because here you have a man with his two daughters on a sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in the Forbidden Zone, by the way, at a time when, sure, the number of dinosaurs out in the wild may be dwindling, but it's still very possible, obviously, to run into one. This story beat makes Ruben a dumbass and a horrible parent. And it's also the writers adding something to the plot that I thought to be unnecessary, if I'm being honest, because they could have easily omitted the family altogether and just kept the movie about the military crew getting the samples and left it at that. Again, if they had done some more character development with Bennett's character, this family isn't even necessary. But I digress, right? Meanwhile, that night, back on Kincaid's boat, Dr. Loomis can't sleep. So he wanders around, eventually finding Bennett, who's also still awake, and the pair have a brief conversation, no doubt designed to make we, the audience, think they may develop some kind of romantic connection, right? A la the reverse of Owen Grady and Claire Dearing from the previous trilogy, right? Before Bennett, finally says goodnight and leaving Dr. Loomis alone on the deck with his thoughts. I need love, right? When I'm alone in the room, sometimes I stare at the wall. LL Cool J. I mean, if you know, you know. The next morning, though, all is quiet when the crew receives a mayday message from Ruben's boat, which is 28 miles away. So keep that in mind. They spent the night on top of this capsized boat calling for help. So, okay. Now, Bennett and Atwater get into an argument about whether or not to postpone their monster hunt and go rescue this family. Now, Kincaid and Bennett eventually win said argument, with Kincaid stating that they should do some good before it's too late. Now, this is a line of dialogue that communicates Kincaid's motivations directly without being too on the nose, and for that reason, I suppose, I approve, right? Now, once they get the family on board Kincaid's boat, he berates Ruben for having his kids out in the Forbidden Zone, given the circumstances, right? Ruben claims that the dinosaurs are almost re-extinct, and this is when the crew decides to continue their mission of hunting down the mosasaur with a civilian family that almost just died, at its hand on board, which was silly as hell, right? And this is what I mean about the writers not even trying, right? You would think that the first order of business would be get the family to safety and then we'll go do what we need to do. Just the liability alone would be massive, but all right. So of course they find the mosasaur eventually, right? Despite Ruben and his family's protests, right? And what was expected to be a simple shoot and extract situation gets hairy as fuck. Once the mosasaur decides, I'm gonna attack the boat. Because of course the mosasaur would attack the boat. Why wouldn't it attack the boat? It's already attacked the boat, right? So Bennett, who was tasked with taking this shot, right, almost falls into the water during the ordeal, but ultimately managed to regain her position on the bridge of said boat and take the shot, successfully extracting the sample needed, and the crew celebrate. 1 down, 2 to go. Now, this victory is short-lived because as they continue on to the island, they run into a pack of Spinosauruses hanging around the mosasaur. And Atwater decides to take out a gun and open fire for zero goddamn reason, which prompts the Spinosauruses to attack the boat. And these Spinosauruses are kind of like, prehistoric crocodiles, if you ask me. But Atwater dies during the attack. Sometimes you get what you order, right? And Teresa goes down below to call for help at her father's request, while Kincaid sails frantically towards the island. And she goes into the cabin and she's met by Krebs in an effort to stop her because remember, their mission and being in the forbidden zone isn't exactly legal, so he can't have her call for help and let people know what they're doing, essentially. But the boat is tipped and Krebs lets Teresa essentially fall into the water. He sees an opportunity to get rid of this chick and kind of be like, it ain't even my fault. Like, I didn't push her off the boat. She fell off the boat, right? And so once Teresa's family notices that she's fallen overboard, my man Xavier to the rescue. He jumps in after her immediately, right? Followed by Ruben and Isabella. Meanwhile, Kincaid and the rest of the crew fight off both the mosasaur and the Spinosauruses as the boat barrels towards the beach, right? And finally, they abandon ship just as Kincaid runs aground. The remaining crew all manage to make it ashore. As Kincaid yells at them to hurry up, that the Spinosauruses can maneuver on land as well as in the water. Ding, 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 right? Which immediately sets up a last-second surprise death as Nina is killed trying to unload equipment that has washed ashore. And, look, here, I won't lie to you, this was action-packed, right? From the time that the mosasaur attacked Kincaid's boat, it was action-packed. The Spinosauruses then come in and kind of up the ante a little bit, and then we basically have the boat racing towards the beach, people falling off the boat into the dino-infested waters, and it all goes to hell pretty quickly. And it was kind of a turned up 5 minutes, and I'll give it that. But the characters here do some things in order to bring that about that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I said, Atwater just opening fire on the dinosaurs. I just go, I don't understand why you would do that, right? I mean, I understand why you might pick up a gun and be ready in case it goes left, but why you would cause it to go left, like, I just don't get it. But, I mean, again, they set this up by Atwater kind of saying, hey, we should kill the mosasaur, right? So we already know that Atwater kind of wants to get in where he fits in when it comes to this. Like, he's down to, like, do some hunting, if you will, for real. So I guess it's in line with his character, even though it was just the height of stupidity. But we do get a pretty cool action sequence out of it, so I suppose, right? Now, from here, the party is essentially separated into two groups, right? Krebs' crew and Ruben's family. And they're both on this island in different parts of the island. And Kincaid wants to go and find Ruben and his family and make sure that they get rescued along with them. But Krebs is still looking to continue the mission of extracting the DNA from the remaining dino species on the list. And Bennett also kind of accuses Krebs of letting Teresa fall in the water. Meanwhile, Ruben is simply trying to get his family safely to the village that they had been talking about when they were studying the map in the hopes of extraction, right? And honestly, this is when I knew for sure that Krebs was the movie's villain, hands down, and that he would not survive the end of this movie. Like, I kind of knew, okay, he's going to get eaten. The Jurassic Park movies tend to, all the bad guys never survive the movie. So, you already know what time it is. Now, this is also the point of the story where the people in Krebs' group find out that the dinosaurs on the islands are mutated, and that experiments were run on them and that kind of thing. And that presents a certain kind of terror, in addition to the terror one might feel about being trapped on Dino Island to begin with, which is just the writer's way of kind of raising the stakes at this point. Again, like I said, if you're going to up the ante from the last movie, you got to kind of figure out some ways to do it. I call it the Fast and Furiousification of Jurassic Park, right? Same kind of, thought processes. So Krebs' crew finally comes across a small group of Titanosauruses in a meadow, right? And we get our Ian Malcolm moment, right? Cue Jurassic Park theme. You look up at it, you crazy son of a bitch, you finally did it, right? Now, Bennett shoots one of the Titanosauruses, and the group collects a second sample pretty easily. As we end up seeing the camera kind of pan up, and we see that there are lots more Titanosauruses in the herd up ahead. And from there, the crew kind of looks to the sky in the direction of what we can all assume is a Quetzalcoatlus nest to ultimately procure the last sample. Meanwhile, on another part of the island, Ruben and his family are trekking through the jungle, and Isabella comes across a baby Aqualops, Vegisaurus, right? That she tries to take as a pet, but as she follows it, she falls down the hill and her family kind of follows behind her, and the small dino gets away. Now, at first, I thought there was going to be a mother Aqualops in this film setting up a confrontation of some kind, but there wasn't. So I'm not quite sure the reason why this even had to happen in the film. But again, I digress, right? And as the family kind of gets up and gets their bearings, they notice a nearby river, and across the river, they see a boat. Now, Teresa decides to go and get the boat because Ruben is kind of hobbling around a bit, and she crosses the river onto the other side and is immediately met by an angry, or at least an agitated Dilophosaurus, right? Who hisses and, spreads the little neck fat, or whatever you want to call it, and whatnot, before ultimately noticing that there's a sleeping T-Rex nearby, and so Dilophosaurus gets on while the getting is good, right? Now, Teresa sneaks into the nearby engine crate and gets the blow-up raft that's inside, and she manages to get back to the dock and inflate the raft before ultimately waking up the T-Rex, we all knew she would, right? But there were a few tense moments where you're like, is the dinosaur going to wake up or not? We kind of knew, sure, of course it is, right? And she manages to even get the boat back across the river to pick up the rest of her family just in time as the T-Rex kind of wakes up, takes a drink in the river, and then notices them paddling away and gives chase, right? Now, as the family frantically paddles the boat, the T-Rex decides, you know what, I'm going to turn it up on them, and I'm going to swim underneath the boat. And the T-Rex comes up on the other side in front of the boat, ultimately flipping it over. And the family is swept downriver as they start to reach the rapids of said river. And the T-Rex, basically tries his very damnedest to eat Ruben, who's underwater. But Ruben does narrowly escape, and he kind of hides behind some rocks, as does the rest of the family. But except Isabella, because Isabella is trapped underneath the flipped over raft as the T-Rex tries to eat it. Now, I don't understand why the T-Rex couldn't chew through this raft when in the original Jurassic Park movie, the T-Rex damn near chewed through a Jeep. But okay. But after a few tense moments, Bella manages to escape and be reunited with the rest of her family, who's hiding behind a series of rocks that kind of close off the mouth of the river to the T-Rex. And, this was just the writers giving Ruben and his family something to do while Krebs and his people ultimately climbed the cliffs to the Quetzalcoatlus nest to try to get the last sample. But again, like I said, it was a pretty tense few minutes involving maybe the most popular dinosaur in the entire franchise. So I understand both why there was a T-Rex on this island and why the writers felt like this sequence was something that they wanted to include in the story, even though narratively speaking, I'm not quite sure it belonged. Because if this is an island full of mutated dinosaurs, it's funny how T-Rex just happened to be hanging out, as well. But, I won't get too deep into the weeds because I understand that these things aren't written for you to get too deep into the weeds, even though, as a screenwriter, these are the kind of things that I'm thinking about as I'm watching, these movies and these TV shows. But again, I digress. So, we catch up with Krebs' crew at the top of said cliffs as they prepare to rappel down to the Quetzalcoatlus nest to get the final sample. Now, Bennett, Loomis, and Leclerc rappel down the side of this cliff, and they finally make it to the unoccupied nest, and Loomis takes the final sample from the egg that's sitting there in said nest. Bennett asks Loomis what his plans for the samples would be, and he explains that everyone should have access to what the samples could do for humanity. Now, Bennett seems unconvinced because, she wants her money. I want you guys to remember, that's why she's on this expedition in the first place, the $10 million she was promised. And as they're having this conversation, of course, the mother is back from running errands, right? And goes absolutely lunchbox on both Bennett and Loomis. And Loomis manages to drop the sample on the floor of this cave as they try to escape the dino's wrath, right? Now, Loomis does recover the sample, but in the chaos, Loomis actually falls out of the cave, down the side of the cliff, and Bennett has to act quickly, like Tomb Raider style, right, to save him. And he drops the sample again nearby, and has to do some acrobatic type shit to get it, right? I didn't know my man had it in him, but you do what you got to, right? And the Quetzalcoatlus ends up chasing my boy Leclerc back up the side of the cliff as he tries to get away by going up, right? And he manages to both catch and eat, bro, before he can get away, right? And it was clear that Leclerc was sent down specifically with the other two to die, right? That's the third person in Krebs' crew to kind of, take the L, right? The capital L. Meanwhile, Loomis manages to retrieve the sample again, and he accidentally fires the rocket into the air just as the rope breaks that he's holding on to, and Loomis falls down the side of the cliff into a nearby river, But the sample arrives as Loomis gets himself together, and now they've got all 3 samples. It's time to go home, right? Again, this was a really kind of turned up couple of minutes, and these are the kinds of scenes that these movies literally lean on. This is what you come to the movie for, right? Again, this is the fun and games part. This is literally why you come to see these movies, to watch the dinosaurs try to eat people. And just to kind of see the majesty of creatures that we've never really seen in real life before, in the first place, right? And so, again, this scene, much like the Tyrannosaurus scene, much like the Mosasaurus scene, much like the Spinosaurus scenes, this is kind of Jurassic Park at its best, right? This is kind of what these films always seem to do quite well, right? So I don't really have any kind of real issue with this particular sequence of events. So now that we've got all the samples, it's time to set up the finale, right? And the first step in that regard is gathering the team, right? The first little subset of the final, the next to last beat in what these stories are supposed to be, right? Now, this is done by having Reuben and his family paddle downstream until they finally come to the village that they were supposed to be looking for, right? Just as Krebs' crew arrives at the village closely behind them, right? And as they arrive, they immediately begin looking for the family, though Krebs protests and at some point disappears. Now, Kincaid and Bennett indeed find the family, and this is simply the writers, again, reuniting the characters to prepare to move through the finale. But this is when Krebs reappears out of the bushes with the gun, and he takes the briefcase from Loomis, who's been watching said briefcase. And at this point, they hear a rather large dino roaring in the distance. So the writers are teasing the big bad here, and just kind of reminding us that dinosaur is still out there, right? We did see the dinosaur, the Distortus Rex at the beginning of the film, but years have passed, so they just want to make sure we understand that the dinosaur is still out there, right? Look, at that point, the lights come on at the facility, and we get the arrival of the Mutodons, essentially like flying raptor-like creatures, right? And this could have really been an interesting idea, because flying dinos could have absolutely threatened the chopper rescue, but I think the writers fumbled this, and could have set up a really interesting kind of escape. But, I guess they ended up getting something close to what they wanted, so I'm not going to eat their lunch too bad on that at this particular point, right? So the next part of the finale is storming the castle, right? And that's where we get the group trying to execute their plan for escape, right? And this is them trying to survive long enough for the chopper to see them when it arrives, right? And Kincaid and Loomis go inside the lab because they're looking for the family. They're trying to make sure that they can find Reuben, his 2 kids, and Xavier, so they can all get the fuck on together, right? And as Loomis and Kincaid search the lab, Kincaid happens to see a boat docked on the river on a monitor inside said lab, right? So now he knows, okay, there's a boat down at the river, and this is how I knew that the chopper rescue was ultimately not going to be how they got off the island, right? And this is kind of the high tower surprise, that being the thing that happens wherein the hero or heroes have to kind of adjust the plan. So the finality is literally paint by numbers to this point. So we got to check there. Now, from there, we see Krebs and Bennett together trying to escape the Mutodons outside. And the case gets separated from Krebs during all the chaos. And inside the store, where the family actually is, Reuben and his family watch as Isabella is chased around by another of the Mutodons, right? Meanwhile, Kincaid and Loomis see all the experiments that the scientists in the movie's opening image were doing on the dinosaurs, right? It's kind of a sad kind of situation. And this is when the chopper actually arrives. In fact, Kincaid and Loomis hear it from inside the lab, and Kincaid goes to find the family right quick. And this is when Loomis sees a hint of the fabled Distortus Rex. And now, outside the lab, we see that Krebs has found a working Jeep, and that he gets in it and he drives off like the corporate fuckboy he is, right? I mean, this is just like Dennis Nedry in the original, right? Dennis Nedry like, I got these samples, I'm finna get the fuck on, right? While the Mutodon that was chasing Isabella around the store, Isabella escapes through the vent and the mutadon goes after her, right, down into the sewer. But the family ends up going down there as well, and they end up trapped by a gate that separates the lab from the river just outside. And after going up top and flagging down the chopper with a flare, because, the chopper flies overhead, doesn't see anybody, and then, Loomis has to go out there and fire the flare, so the chopper circles back. And then Lewis goes down into the sewer after them, right? And this is where the chopper is totally destroyed by Distortus Rex, which is exactly what I had on my bingo card, right? And this is where our heroes have to dig deep down, right? The fourth part of the finale. In other words, now they have to all get to the boat because the chopper is no longer an option. Now, from here, we see Bennett appear down in the sewer just as the mutadon is about to descend upon the Reuben and his family, right? As they're trapped by said gate, and she shoots it dead. And at that point, Isabella is called upon to save the day by slipping through the bars of said gate and opening it for the adults. And she manages to slip through the bars and get outside as Distortus Rex closes in outside the gate. And inside the gate, another of the mutadons arrives from into the sewer system. And, Krebs arrives again in the Jeep as the rest of the characters, eventually get out from under the gate as Isabella does manage to open it, and they all make a break for the boat, right? Now, while that's happening, Krebs gets himself eaten by DR, and of course, he drops the briefcase, right? Because the dinosaur can eat the man, but not the briefcase, I suppose. Loomis then picks it up, because of course he does, just as DR approaches Isabella. And this is when my man Kincaid shows up and lights a flare to distract DR, and he runs away, jumping into the river as DR gives chase. Now, the remaining of the characters all hop on the boat as, Bennett calls out for Kincaid. And in the distance, we see the flare that he's holding go out. So you assume that Kincaid dies as Reuben starts up the boat. And the characters all get the hell off the island, right? But then, as they're headed towards open water, they see another flare, and it turns out that my man Kincaid indeed survives the Distortus Rex. Somehow, we don't know, right? And this was the execution of the new plan, right? And from here, the film's final image is the characters in a boat speeding through open water. We see that Xavier has finally earned Reuben's respect, right? He's finally like, okay, now you can date my daughter and I don't have an issue with it, right? Because you're not a sorry sack of shit no more, right? Bennett decides to give Loomis the samples, foregoing her payday. And then we see a school of dolphins swimming alongside the boat. And from there, we fade to black. Okay, so look, I honestly thought the setup of this movie was maybe the most ridiculous I've seen in the entire franchise to this point, right? Which went a long way in making it incredibly difficult for me to suspend my disbelief moving forward as I watch this thing, right? Because, look, mutant dinosaurs, though interesting to look at and think about is, I think, jumping the proverbial shark if ever I've seen it. And all the dinosaurs weren't even mutants, right? You had a Dilophosaurus that seemed untouched. You had a T-Rex that looks like a T-Rex. And even the Quetzalcoatlus, there were a lot of dinosaurs that were just regular old dinosaurs. And I really kind of felt like the dinosaurs could have just been regular dinosaurs. Like, especially if you're telling me that all the dinosaurs are becoming extinct, then we could have just had regular dinosaurs. But again, like I said, the fast and furiousification of these types of movies just require you to up the ante, up the ante, up the ante. A movie that comes to mind is The Meg, right? Where in the first movie there was one Meg. Well, there was more than one Meg, but then they had to go, now there's a bunch of Megs and these little raptor creatures or whatever that were in the Meg too. You have to kind of keep upping the ante. So I guess you just have to live with this is what they wanted to do, right? And again, like I said, I guess as a screenwriter, Universal's just not going to stop churning out these Jurassic Park movies. So you might as well just get ready. It's a cash grab. They're trying to print cash, and that's just what it is. I thought casting and the acting was serviceable. I thought Scarlett Johansson has proven that she can pull off an action hero of sorts through her portrayal of Black Widow in the MCU. But her character was just bland, and it was just there wasn't enough there for us to care about. And even though she survives the movie, it's like, well, so what, right? She gives back the money she's supposed to make, but again, so what? We don't even know what she sacrificed by doing that because there wasn't enough character development. The directing and the production design were all serviceable as well, but that's something we should all expect when you consider the film has a budget just south of $200 million, right? I did think the film had a tad more action than JP films of the past, and that may have helped pass the film's rather predictable plot progression through its 2+ hour runtime. And while we're mentioning the film's plot, Who Lived and Who Died was a bit of a surprise in that there was just a lot of people from Kincaid's crew that kind of bit the dust, and when they died, as it was painfully clear that that's where the writers kind of tried to find room to subvert expectations. Like I said, I knew Krebs was going to die. That wasn't anything that was a surprise to me, and I think everybody could have pegged that, from like 20 minutes into the movie. And while we're talking about who lived and who died, I thought there were too many characters in this one, right? And ultimately, I thought we could have used, again, more character development for Bennett in particular, but we didn't get that because the ensemble cast was just too big, right? And I think that if we had kept this to just Kincaid, Bennett, and the science crew, we could have really got some character development for Bennett's character, and I think that would have gone a really a long way in making the film kind of just come across better. You know what I'm saying? Again, like I said, we just didn't get enough information about Bennett to truly care about her and what she was doing past her simply surviving the film, right? I mean, I'll admit to you guys, I didn't want to see her die. But at the same point, I was like, as long as she survives, the rest of it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, at the end of the film, like, again, she gives up the payday she negotiated for herself so hard for at the beginning of the story. But again, I didn't find myself caring about that very much because we just didn't know enough about her to know how the money would have impacted her life, made it any better. And the same goes for Kincaid as well. The only part of the film that did end up meaning a little something to me was watching Xavier's character go from being hated by Ruben to ultimately having his respect and his blessing to date his daughter, right? I think we could have used a few more moments of him earning that honor. Like, for example, when Teresa crossed the river in front of the sleeping T-Rex to get the raft, if Xavier had maybe done that so that Teresa didn't have to, that would have been another chance for him to kind of show the dad, look, I got this. You know what I'm saying? I can hold her down when she goes off to college. I got it. And I think the writers missed an opportunity to really bolster. If you want us to see, Xavier as kind of having been changed by the experience, I think that the writers could have done more to force that. Because my man Xavier, I mean, when he went to take a whiz in the woods and the dinosaurs were kind of coming out in the dark about to eat him, I mean, he only survived this thing by sheer luck. You know what I'm saying? Point blank period. I mean, and I guess you can make that argument for the entirety of Ruben's family, because they were civilians on this island and they just kind of trekked through the jungle, found the village and were rescued somehow. But their survival was luck. I think that Bennett and Kincaid and them had a much better plan for survival than Ruben and his family did. And if you notice that it was Kincaid's crew that took all the L's. So it was just kind of one of those things where I kind of felt like that was a little weird, but, again, I digress. Now, overall, I give this film, a 5.5, a 55%, or a 5.5 if you think an IMDb score, right? Look, if you've been here with me for a while, then you know I'm a proponent of Hollywood studios finding new and interesting stories to tell us. But they seem not to want to do that, because they don't believe those stories can be profitable on a global stage. And since most films lose money at the box office, I expect that we'll get 2 more of these movies in this iteration of the franchise over the next few years, right? Now, that said, I got to tell you guys, I'm kind of afraid of what the next JP film will even look like at this point, because after 30 years since what I remember as the most uniquely unbelievable movie-going experience in my lifetime, I have to admit that the carcass of Michael Crichton's T-Rex has been picked clean, in my opinion, right? Long story short, the movie is nothing special. But if you're looking for a 10:30 a.m. movie that you can take your small kids to this summer before you send them back to school, and you've got a little more than 2 hours to spare, I guess this movie will do, right? But what do you guys think? Have you had a chance to see Jurassic World Rebirth yet? If you have, what did you think about how the story was told and some of the beats that took place, especially after the midpoint? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.